Welcome to ENside Politics, our weekly podcast on San Antonio politics, so the name makes sense. My name is Greg Jefferson. I'm Metro Editor at the San Antonio Express News. I'm joined today by City Hall reporter Molly Smith. Welcome.
Hello.
And very excited about this guest, Democratic political consultant at James Aldrete, based in Austin, but he's worked on a load of mayoral and council races in San Antonio. Welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate the invitation.
Oh, sure. Hey, I wanted to start out with something that I don't think is going to shed a lot of light on how this election is going, but let's look at the early results of early voting in Bexar County. So, and this is like, I know you're about to tell me, I bet. I just suspect you're going to say there's almost nothing we can say about it, very little we can extrapolate. Let's just give it a shot. So on the first day of early voting, Bexar County residents cast about 6,500. Right. Down 30% from from the first day of early voting in 2023. Let's start with that. What can we take away from that? I mean, does that mean having a 27 candidate field in the mayor's race just doesn't excite people?
If not, it doesn't excite people. It probably presents a lot of anxiety.
Overwhelms them.
Yeah, I think it was the book, the Paradox of Choice. You know, it's more choice doesn't bring more freedom; it brings more anxiety. I think what you're going to see very likely is anemic turnout in round one, and then it's just going to explode in round two when there's clear choices for people to like wrap their heads around.
And round two for everyone is the June 7th runoff. That's going to be all but guaranteed for the mayor's race, and also a couple of these open council seats on the ballot.
Correct. The way that the digital ballot box works, all 27 candidates are there on one screen, so it's a lot. No one's really necessarily disadvantaged. Anecdotally, people are walking into some of the early voting things just to pick up a sample ballot and then head home, as they're still like wrapping their heads around their three choices. Or the three opportunities to vote. Well, if you're looking for a quiet place to read, Sims Library may be a good place right now. So.
Now, I mean, just given the breadth of this field, it's really remarkable. How important does that make the ballot order, where your name is on the actual ballot?
I'd say not much. Really? Typically what you have in those first 2 days of early voting is higher percentage of voting, and then it drops down. And that's because your people who already have their minds made up are going to the polls with what they're planning to do. So few people are getting there taking a crapshoot, on that. But what you see is there's not enough people coming in there with their minds made up. So I don't think the ballot order is making that big of a difference. What you have is who is their base, who's got their solid people going out there, and they're all running small campaigns.
Yeah. Now take kind of the top 8 candidates. I mean, these are the ones who have raised the most money. They've got some history, some public history we can refer to. And they just have some modicum of experience. Kind of walk me through who has a lot of overlapping base among them. Like who are the candidates who are really having to struggle because there's another candidate in the race with a very similar profile and very similar supporters?
First, I'd say they're all struggling. Every one of them, even what you consider to be the top funded candidates. We did Ron Nirenberg's last re-election. I think we probably had a budget around $750,000, and the amount of things we couldn't do, outweighed what we could do. You're now talking about people running with campaigns, $200,000 to $400,000. A chunk of that goes to kind of overhead. And then what you're seeing really is just in this past week that some level of voter communications is starting. But when you're doing voter communication, you're looking for two things. You're looking for reach, how big is your audience? And then you're looking for frequency, how often can you keep this conversation going? What many of them have done is like narrow the reach so they can have at least a level and frequency. I think people are playing for 20%, of the vote. They're not playing to win it because they don't have the resources. Big city, small town. It is a big city. There are a number of people that are typically voting, and the level of conversation that they're having is just so limited. So I think you see that narrow part of it. I think the next aspect to really consider beyond the anxiety of 27 candidates is this is really a continuity election. You saw it in the charter amendments when voters happily gave city council pay raises. They happily extended their terms. The most recent UTSA poll has, the city on the right track with 48%. That may not seem like a lot, but these days to have a 48% right track is awesome. But then you're really looking at the ratio between right track or right direction and wrong direction. That's 48 to 29. That's like a 1.7 kind of ratio. That's pretty strong. And, the most popular figure is the current outgoing mayor on Nuremberg. And so you have a continuity election. You don't have, we can talk on Rolando if you care to, but with the exception of Rolando and Clayton, you really do not have issue differences that are driving this. They're all kind of doing resume campaigns.
Right. In the case of Rolando Papalos, he's drawing some very sharp distinctions between himself and City Hall as it's been run over the last 8 years. I mean,
so he's playing to that 29% wrong direction. So that is a limited crowd, just to point out. He happily ties himself to Greg Abbott, who has 51% strongly disapproved, 60% overall disapproved. Don't get me wrong, a 20% game can put you into the runoff. But he has clearly narrowed his reach to play, into that wrong direction crowd, and isn't playing for a 50% number by any means.
The Bexar County Democratic Party earlier this week put out an attack ad criticizing Rolando Papalos' connections to Greg Abbott. Rolando is an appointee of Abbott. He served as Texas Secretary of State from 2017 to 2018. I'm kind of curious with that attack ad that the party is putting out, which is something we haven't really seen from them. Does that kind of lead you to believe that many of the candidates in this race who identify as Democrats see Rolando as their main competitor to kind of get into a runoff?
I think what you've seen in a number of states, if you go really into like U.S. Senate races, you have efforts to elevate somebody as a straw man to then send signals to different groups. Rolando's campaign, frankly, like any of the campaigns, hasn't broken any threshold. In the first UTSA poll, he was at 0.8. I think he's moved up to 4 to 5. So it's not like they're taking on a known quantity. They're lifting him up to let Democrats know that there is a Republican in the race, and to kind of motivate a Democratic base. Now, who that benefits? Well, it benefits only those who will position themselves in a partisan lane, openly do that, and then have the resources to make sure that those signals are out there. John Courage, Adriana voted against the reproductive, justice, initiative. So that really only leaves Gina and Melissa. I don't even think Beto and Manny voted against that as well. I don't think Beto has positioned himself in any kind of partisan way or entered in that conversation. So it looks like there's really only one beneficiary of that campaign, and that's, the elevator vote for Gina.
And Gina is, according to the UTSA poll that came out in mid-April, she was leading with about 13%. I'm curious, as a campaign consultant, how much kind of credence you put in that poll, which is showing kind of Gina in the lead. Next up, John Courage, 8%. And then kind of in third right now, the poll is showing Beto with about a little over 6.5. I mean, is that something that we can say this may be a good indication of what the vote will look like, or kind of what do you make of the poll?
I think it's a very credible poll. And I think the first thing to take away from it is 30% of the people have made no decision. I think, even above Gina is 15% of the people that say they don't recognize any of the candidates. I think that's the anxiety that so many people watching this, are feeling. I think he captured the anxiety incredibly well. You want to be leading, yes, but you don't want to be leading with 13. You want to be leading in a larger portion of it. But the fact that there is now 2 of the UTSA polls and that trend is holding consistent and is even growing in her favor, it's strong. I think there's no doubt. It's an open race right now with 27 candidates. Get out and vote. But there's no doubt that Gina is positioning herself in the strongest position of all.
Yeah, she seems to be presenting herself as, less of a partisan figure and more kind of as a can-do kind of nuts and bolts operator. Is there anything about her campaign and the way she's presenting herself that's surprising to you?
Not really. I'd say just from past campaigns, this is the most I've seen her, frankly, comfortable in her own skin. She seems to be enjoying herself out there.
Does she? I don't know. She seems a little uneasy. That's just my impression. But you think she's getting more comfortable and better at campaigning?
It may be a podcast format that over the length of time you get that. So on a couple of the podcasts that I've seen her on, I think you get both her intellect and you get a little bit of her humor and you get a little bit of her story. But there's no doubt that intellect and the vision kind of come together for it. Anything surprising? No. You say that it's, a more general campaign, but she still sends all the signals to what is a Democratic city, predominantly, that she's supported by Emily's List, that she believes, in dignity for LGBT, families. There's a number of those signals that are out there that other people say are outside concerns, but many people in San Antonio feel are under attack. She, vocally defends her support on the reproductive, justice fund.
That's right. Yeah. She's a big supporter of access to abortion.
I'm curious about John Courage. In the recent poll, he's in second place, though is a few points behind Gina. And I'm curious kind of what you make of his runoff successes. I mean, he's someone who is not raising any money. Don't see a lot of his campaign signs. And when you do, they're far smaller than the other ones. So you actually have to kind of, I think, know that it's a John Courage sign as opposed to some of these really big signs you can see from far away. He jumped into the race early, then he dropped out, jumped back in. I mean, does all of that, the lack of fundraising and then this kind of wishy-washiness of the campaign, impact his runoff chances?
Stupid Siri.
For all those who haven't gone in the campaign and out of the campaign and raised more money, they're still not hitting 10%. So for all those who have technically maybe have done it right, he's got a couple things. You mentioned ballot order. I would take a name like John Courage for a political campaign.
I've always felt like he's got the magic name for politics.
He's got a magic name.
He should be president. Why is he not president? I mean, with a name like Courage, my God.
He's got height as well. I wish I had his height.
He is a tall dude. That's true.
He's a tall dude with the name John Courage. He's likable. And what he's really enjoyed, from everything I can tell, is the constituency service of the job. So he's built real friendships. He's built levels of trust. He probably actually has a base where I'm not sure the others do. You can easily get on city council and get lost on city council. And I think some of them are finding that out.
Now, he's not shy about talking about his motivation for getting back into the race, which was that he's alarmed by a lot. I think he's really talking about Gina Ortiz Jones, Beto Altamirano, and Rolando Papules, who he considers outsiders who are completely unfamiliar with how city council works, with how city hall works, and that he got back in order to keep the mayor's office away from one of them. As a consultant, does that make you cringe a little bit? Does that imply anything about his campaign and how he's running it? Or is it just like, well, you have to say something when you've changed your mind and are jumping back into a race?
You have to say something when you change your mind. But
so you don't really take it seriously.
The opposite of your argument is those that are overly strict and limited to talking points. don't build trust. And the fact that when you hear John, you often think you're getting the authentic John, not a filtered one, not a scripted one. I think is just part of who he is.
Yeah.
Now, if the leading candidate wasn't unknown, these things would matter. But the leading candidate currently is unknown. So that little drama of, his argument, I don't think process arguments really resonate with voters. Outside money, or they don't have the city council experience, but they present their resumes. To most people, they look qualified enough. What we found in the last presidential election was people rather have a shock to the system than defend the institutions. They thought, the economy wasn't working well. They'd rather have a shock to the system, even if it meant going outside the bounds. And I don't see, even though it's a continuity election, we're not seeing that experience within council is the largest factor that people are looking at.
Okay. Now, it sounds like, and partly, correct me if I've kind of misconstrued you, but it sounds like when we're talking about Rolando Pablos, you think he's got a pretty difficult path to victory, right? Because of how he's conducted his campaign. He's kind of he's appealing to a base of voters who just don't like how things are going at City Hall. And, part of that would be not just, they may not like Project Marvel, the planned sports and entertainment district, but ideologically, they're just kind of opposed to the drift of this council. I mean, which may be why Pablos weighed in recently on new funding for the Reproductive Justice Fund. Say though, he did make it into the runoff. Does his tone change, and what he talks about, is it different? Is it less against how City Hall has been run, or is it just more of the same? He's just going to dig in and really try to work that base of support and get them out to vote again. I guess he's going to try to expand the electorate for himself.
I mean, that's his call. He can dig in and get 29%. He can pivot and be a mayor that's more for the broader city and see if he can expand his electorate with the option of going to 50%. But you don't become mayor unless you get 50% plus one. And on the message that he's been on, as I've watched it a little bit from a distance, don't get me wrong, I don't have a dog in this hunt at all, but he started off afraid that people were going to label him a Republican. Then he embraced heavily being a Republican. And then when the video came out, he was offended that they called him a Republican. I haven't gotten a clear message, but the one thing that keeps coming through on his stuff is a little bit like he's running for HOA president, talking about, garbage here, garbage there, pothole there. And then second is no tax and kind of Republican, typical talking points. The challenge is the intensity is on the Democratic side at the moment. When you're out of power, San Antonio, no city is immune from what their news feed is, which is way more national than it is local. And as their angers are there, the anger and the intensity is on the out of power aspect of it. And so I don't know that we're seeing yet we just crossed the threshold of 1% early vote. But I don't know that we've seen yet that there's Republican forces that are coming behind Rolando to carry that further. But he's going to have to pivot. He's got a good shot at the runoff, but not at becoming mayor if he's running a 29% strategy.
And if he gets into a runoff, can he even distance himself from Greg Abbott? I mean, he's a Greg Abbott appointee. One of his big talking points is that he can call up the governor. The governor will take his call. That's going to help San Antonio get what it wants at the state level. I'm just curious, kind of, given that there are so many voters in San Antonio who do not like Abbott, how he can even maneuver if he gets to a runoff, kind of with this Abbott connection.
I think what we've seen is the Abbott connection hasn't put him above 10%, and the Abbott connection puts a ceiling that he'll never get to 50. Ron Nirenberg worked with Dan Patrick on Alamo stuff, worked with Ted Cruz on the airport stuff. Everyone will bring in a coalitions and kind of spread out to put the city forward. But Rolando has gone his personal relationships forward. But then you don't see it being balanced with the broader message.
I want to ask you about Manny Pallay. He made news a couple weeks ago because he put in, he loaned his campaign $300,000, got this kind of big fundraising boost. He comes from District 8, North Side District, enjoys kind of high voter turnout compared to the district that Adriana Rocha Garcia is in, and even Melissa Cabello Havrda. I'm curious what you see kind of his path to victory is, if any, particularly given that he's in kind of fourth place in that UTSA poll, and whether this infusion of cash can help his campaign this late in the game.
I think it's right now you're seeing a race for who's that second slot in the runoff. And I would put Manny in the mix. I think it's Manny. I think it's Beto. I think it's Rolando, and John Courage. I think are the four that really have the best shot for kind of taking that second pole position. Like I said, every one of them are running 20% campaigns. When you have $300,000, that doesn't allow you to run citywide. One piece of mail will cost you, let's say 80 cents. If you're going to multiply that times 50,000 voters, you're using up a chunk and you're not going to have that level of repetition. His stuff, from what I've seen, is fairly digital. I have friends that have gotten 4 or 5 pieces from Beto, but seeing nothing from Manny. I have other friends that everywhere they go, they see Manny digital ads, but have gotten no mail from Beto. So how people are kind of targeting, you're seeing really a fragmented universes between the campaigns and then the bases that they're trying to build. So it's because it's not on one playing field. We can't really measure apples to apples. But he's running a fairly smart campaign. He got, the first runner-up prize from the San Antonio Express News, I think, and their endorsement. So some nice words. I think he got first or second runner-up prize in Barb Brevard's, newsletter with some nice words. Who frankly I think did a strong advocacy for his actual accomplishments that I hadn't seen elsewhere. And then running an intense digital thing while people are making up their minds. Still, everyone's a long shot, but you're seeing solid things from Manny.
Now, give me your opinion on. So when you say those 4 candidates, any one of them could make the runoff in the second spot. So I'm assuming you're saying Gina is going to be. She'll more than likely be in that runoff. Gina Ortiz Jones, give me your opinion on what the appeal of her is. So she's run 2 congressional candidates in big parts of Bexar County. Why do you think she's in the position she is today?
Cool. And let's just say the position she's in today, if we just take the UTSA poll, is 13%.
Right. Which is, not great, but better than everybody else, right? So
yeah, okay, so everyone else isn't even on her shadow at the moment.
That's right. Yeah. So how did she get there?
The main thing you want in any kind of political communications or political campaign is to give voters a sense of what you stand for, what are the chords that kind of drive you, what is your motivation, and so a number of them, and I'll throw Manny in here too. They pretend it's a nonpartisan race. You can go back to the old Jim Hightower, saying that the only thing in the middle of the road are yellow stripes and dead armadillos. Being nonpartisan says nothing when many people feel that you can pick an issue. The same issues don't have to bother everybody, but the wipeout of their 401ks, the depletion of their 529s for their college funds, friends, immigrant status, making them think twice, a student being picked up from wherever, just saying that you're nonpartisan, you leave all that at the door. It doesn't have to be shrill and partisan. The question, you can still say you work with everybody, but you have to say what it is you stand for. So if your communication, if your main message is, leave partisanship at the door, it's all for the city, that's just platitude. And what Gina has done is show people clearly what she stands for.
Hey, Monty, can you put up that meme? So John Dixon, who is a cybersecurity entrepreneur in San Antonio, follows San Antonio politics pretty closely. He posted this on X yesterday afternoon, and I think is actually pretty accurate. And it explains why. And by politicos, I think what he actually means are lawyers, lobbyists, like all of those who are intent and heads of nonprofits, community activist groups, Cops Metro among them. They're all intensely interested in who's going to make the runoff. And right now, I think you're seeing just not a lot, very few are committing to a candidate. And I think that's reflected in the campaign financing reports we're seeing. They're pretty skimpy all around, unless you're talking about self-funding. Describe for me what you think.
Skimpy. They're all skimpy, even self-funded.
Right. Yeah.
When you
right. Oh, go ahead. Finish that thought.
Oh, it's a big city. $300,000 does not go far. You cannot talk to all voters. And like I said, when you see 1.7 to 1, but overall people saying that things are on the right track. They feel comfortable in their city. They gave council, members raises. They extended their terms. They like the current mayor. The only thing you can have to really play off is the chaos that goes around us on the state and the nation. And so to be that continuity voice is saying, to recognize the chaos out there, but we got something going on in San Antonio. You need to have money to communicate that. You need to do it really more on video, but if you can do it in print, you need to be out there to be that calming voice that people are kind of looking for. Mm-hmm. And none of them have the funding to do it.
Yep.
Again, you have like 7 campaigns that are playing a 20% strategy game.
Yeah. Describe for me what the atmosphere of the runoff is going to be like. How chaotic is it going to be in the year, like right after election night? And I think I was Dixon, John Dixon made a little joke about how a lot of political insiders are going to be deciding election night which campaign parties to go to, which election night parties to go to. Based on the results, and they will have, just so they can have some kind of FaceTime with candidates. What's that first week going to be like after election night?
I think for most of them, it's going to be, they'll all have to broaden their bases. I think Gina's leading, but it definitely has a sense of a movement campaign, that there are people that are aligned with her. But I think people are recognizing that. I think people are kind of reaching out. I think she has her I imagine she has her outreach plan to say how we grow on this. Mm-hmm. I think you mentioned earlier that her overall campaign message is really citywide focused, even though her audience isn't citywide focused. Mm-hmm. And that door will be open. I think for the other candidates are going to have to do the same. They're going to have to figure out where their base was and how do they broaden. I think Manny's running a strong campaign, but I think it's probably fairly north side centric. I think John is depending on a base, but he'll need a broader numbers. He's going to have to work the phone heavy. Beto's an interesting person. I think he's run his campaign kind of like a venture capital person, kind of like he is. It's like, invest in this product. Other than the endorsement of Nelson Wolff, you didn't see where it grew up beyond him. It's really kind of him and his broad vision. So I think what you'd have to see really with Beto would be a quick line of endorsements. I think the, easy contrast that people can imagine would be Gina versus Rolando. I think any other combination makes it, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen on how people judge two personalities with no big distinctions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is it going to get ugly?
It's going to get defining. And if you call definition ugly, sure.
Right. You take the last question.
Before we let you go, we do want to ask you kind of what city council races you're watching. All 10 seats are on the ballot. 4 of those are open. And then in District 4, 6, 8, and 9, and in District 1, you have an incumbent facing 9 challengers. So just wanted to get quickly from you kind of what are the council races that you're watching come May 3rd.
Cool. Just to beat the same drum, it really is a continuity election. I think you saw that in the confidence in the charter amendments. I think you see it in the right track. I think you see it in the mayor's favorables. So number one, if any incumbent goes into a runoff, that's a real sign of weakness, that there's something else going on there. So I think people are looking at one just because a D1 because of, there's been sharp critiques, whether they're connecting or not, whether that's just a person that understands how to get heard in the media sphere, and whether or not it's resonating with people. It's still a very neighborhood centric kind of district with still low turnout as every other place is. If you're not seeing big turnout now, you're not seeing a change nature against incumbents. So I think the rule one is, are the incumbents fine? Are they, clearing the hurdle by a long shot? And anyone that doesn't, even if they're leading, that's a sign of weakness. On the others, you have multiple candidates, a handful in each one of them. There are a handful that are all credible and viable by every standard, but there are no defining narratives that are shaping in any of that part of it. Even Project Marvel hasn't become a defining issue in the mayor's race. And frankly, if there are no defining issues in the mayor's race, it's harder to get a defining issue in the city council race. Mm-hmm. And so you see no defining issues there. So really all you're going to see is, who did more signal and less noise with whatever their limited resources were.
All right. James Aldrete, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. If there are any of you left who have not signed up for our ENside Politics newsletter, drop down to show notes, click the link, and please sign up. And we will see you next week. Thank you.